Hello everybody. Today we will be talking about the meaning and approaches to organizational behavior. We have talked about it last time also, and it is a continuation of that, but with better details, more details, and some clarifications with examples that will be helping you to understand the real meaning of organizational behavior and apply it to your life, to your studies, to your understanding. Now, what we see here is that OB is the body of knowledge and people skill. So, knowledge and skill both are integral part of organizational behavior if you want to understand it, and analyze, predict and manage behavior, especially at work. So, the work behavior is a little different from the ordinary behavior that you see in everyday life, because the organizations are restrictive in one sense that they are run by rules, regulations, which we will be clarifying at a later stage. And this work will help you with the help of theories, practical examples, to decipher the different kinds of approaches to understanding human behavior at work. So, one approach is that we take the theories, and the other is where there is an interdisciplinary approach where we borrow, like we said in the last time also, from sociology, psychology, cultural anthropology, economics and so many other disciplines to understand and analyze the cause of behavior and its effects, especially for understanding the production, effectiveness and human satisfaction, that is worker satisfaction at organization. Now, the organizational processes, let us understand that, because here, as I said earlier, that the behavior is restricted by the organization. Now, what is the meaning of that? We have to understand the organizational structure. What kind of structure, which will be coming to you later, little later, but the first we will be concentrating more on behavior. So, the structural part in brief is where we look at the rules, regulations, different processes, different aims and objectives, different people, their own qualifications. These are all becoming a part of the organizational structure. Like for instance, before we had this whole discipline of MBA, which is now a must for becoming a manager, people used to come from technical background, sometimes from a social sciences background, even from literature. So, this is where we need to take up a holistic approach in understanding the processes and human behavior. Now, for the behavior in organizations, there are two levels of understanding. The first one is reactive, where the belief is that the behavior is caused. Like if you don't have rules, then people will be unruly. So, the rules cause the behavior. The other is proactive, which is more applicable these days and more human related. This is dependent on the belief that behavior can be caused, which is the aim of any organizational setup, that you make people behave in a particular way. So, this is the earlier one is reactive, now we have the proactive. And the OB precepts are helpful for us to understand why and what part of behavior at work, why people behave the way they do in organizations, and what is it that they are trying to gain, what is it that the organization is trying to gain. This is the foundation on which the prediction and control of behavior rests. Just to clarify things in a better way, any organization has a purpose. So, whosoever is taken as an organizational member or part of the organization, their behavior is expected in a particular manner. If a marketing person is there, so he has to understand the market and the product and relate them. If the production person is there, then he has to understand the technicalities of production, its qualities and its possibilities, both from financial point of view, economic point of view and social point of view. Those things actually predict and control the behavior within organization. This thing one has to keep in mind all the time. So, we have to really focus on why and what part of the human behavior at work. What is the main aim of management or managers, and what is the relationship of understanding OB? Why it is important for people, for managers especially, to understand the principles of OB as applied science. And in other words, the managers must have the human or people skill. And why? Reason is that they have to proactively predict and control human behavior in organizations. The term control will be coming quite often because the rules that are set in any organization, whether it is a government organization, political organization or social organization, the rules are made to streamline, and this streamlining must be under prediction, that under this kind of situation, under these kinds of controls, you have to behave in this particular way. And the other is that you cannot always predict that if you give the best of conditions, most comfortable conditions, you cannot always expect that the best behavior will ensue, because organizational conditions cannot really restrict or control or predict human differences. Here is the psychological aspect where we say that individual differences cause differences in behavior. If you give a sweet to a child, the way that child responds may not be the same if you give it to another child who may not like the sweets. So, the conditions, organizational conditions, cannot always cause the kind of behavior that you expect from people, and here is the role of the manager, that the manager has to understand both the individual people skill and also the group skills of people. So, there is a continuous pressure on managers' understanding of human behavior, and OB helps in predicting and as well as understanding the human behavior, what will cause what and for whom. This is a basic issue that the managers are facilitated by the understanding of organizational behavior and its processes. And the important aspects under these conditions are, as you see, social influences, group norms, personal attributes and values, which actually cause individual differences. For instance, people having a particular mindset coming maybe from their understanding of the leader's influence, the group members' influence, they will have a particular way of thinking. This is, in brief, is the social influence. The family shapes the child's thinking. The school shapes the child's thinking. The teachers shape the child's thinking, and which continue in their adulthood also. Then there is the group norm, like we have the friends group. Same way in organizations also, people form their own group. May not be always from their own division. It may be across the organization. So, the clubs, for instance, workers' clubs, workers' unions, there they form norms which may not be always same as that of the organization. Then there are personal attributes, which mean that the person with his training, a person coming from a place distant away from the city life, may be having different attributes. Like in today's world, with the pandemic that is happening, we know how the workers flew away from the cities and went to their own village place. But this may not be true for all. So, there are personal attributes. The city bred will have a different attribute, and the village bred or non-city bred person may be having a different kind of attribute. So, we have these personal attributes due to various reasons and causes, and which give rise to the values they have of life, which is another very important aspect which guide behavior. The values that you have, a person with a right kind of upbringing, of course, the right is defined by the family, by their group. This right kind of value must match the values of the organization. Then only there will be a behavior which will be homogeneous, both with the individual as well as the organization. Now, such things, they contribute towards the organizational processes, organizational functions, and organization's future directions. So, they become very important for us to understand for becoming not only a good manager, but also knowing that what kind of space the organization is going to take up in society, what is good and what is bad. That is defined by individual, then society, and then ultimately the organization. So, that is how the whole thing becomes very important for us to understand, decipher and practice. Now, mostly what happens that the individual, the human behavior is understood by the manager as being caused by the organization. An organization which is having social values, they will be able to garner the individual mind with those values, and there will be no mismatch between the organizational processes and the individual processes, social processes. But we have to keep in mind that a manager can only understand the organizational causes, but they cannot change the social, group and individual causes, because every individual belongs to some society, some group, and that person is an individual, whether he or she. So, the whole process becomes little complex here, that human behavior is just not caused by organization. If you give a good pay, good working conditions, you cannot expect a good behavior all the time, because they may be affected by the society. You cannot retain a person just by giving best of working conditions, because there are other aspects which cannot be controlled by the organization. Sometimes the human behavior, if you want to predict it, you have to rely upon the causative aspects of behavior. What are the family pressures? What are the individual's mindset? What he or she wants to be in life? All these things, they affect the human behavior patterns, which in turn affect the organizational behavior pattern. Very important aspect, at if you want to control the behavior, we have to really have a proactive approach. This proactive approach means, what are the consequences of behavior? I will tell you one thing, one study that was done to find out why people leave organization. The obvious reason may be that they may not be getting enough salary, adequate salary. There may be no future development and growth within the organization. But what are the impact of that person on his or her family, society? This is very difficult to understand, and a manager can only be effective if he or she is able to understand the consequences of behavior. Like the old Peter principle, saying that you rise to the level of inefficiency. That means that if you give a raise in terms of money or in terms of position to a person, you have to make that person be able to know what are the impact, and also give enough opportunity for that job, for that raise to the individual to learn what he or she is going to face in this kind of raise that he or she has got. So, this is a proactive approach in brief, that you have to really enable, empower the person for development, and if the person is not having that motivation to get a developmental perspective, then you have to tell that person, train that person, and make that person learn the consequences that are going to affect him or her. Now, OB is also empowered and enriched by human resources, contingency and systems approach. Human resources is actually developmental. It is not totally management oriented. It is basically how do we develop the individual, the group, which will be leading to organizational development. So, it's an approach where organization is just not seen as a mechanism for work, for production, for marketing and all the management principles that you are familiar with. It is both individual development as well as leading to that development, leading to organizational development. The contingency approach is based on situational variations, meaning that the time, space and all kinds of dynamics that are operating at any time are not perpetual, are not permanent, static. They are continuously evolving, changing and also sometimes dying out. This approach of managing as per the contingency, as per the requirement becomes very important. And the open systems approach combines all the approaches of human resource, systems approach, contingency approach and so on. So, the open systems is where we are away from rigid dynamics. Now, let us come to models of OB. What are they? What are models? Let us first understand models is a predictive way of relating different aspects of anything, whether it is organization, whether it is society, and they help in predicting behavior, understanding behavior, because the models are actually the pattern of ways in which people are put into a kind of a boundary. And these are important because the people in especially large organizations are too many to have intimate face to face contact and the tasks are pretty complex. So, when we come to a model, actually it is a conglomeration of mutually agreed purposes, and this is also known as the rational coordination of activities of a number of people for achievement of some common purpose through division of labor, functions and hierarchy of authority and responsibility. Model is further understood in terms of the differentiated and coordinated human activities. So, it is basically wielding together, and basic purpose of any model is to solve some problems, why it happened, post hoc or ad hoc analysis of predicting the future. So, these any system or model of organization combines three things: people, technology and structure. People basically mean the individual differences, personal, psychological, emotional, cultural, economic and political aspects of organization. They need to be identified to understand the people part, the individual differences. Then we have the technology component, which in overall way has two sets: ergonomics, where is man and working environment adjustment, models for that, and human engineering, the man machine compatibility, which are addressed by the technology. And technology is also a determinant of people's skill, positioning and status. So, technology is also very important. And structure basically is a combination or interface between people and technology, authority, subordinate relationships, in brief the hierarchy, the functional specialization and division of labor. All such things are part of the organizational structure, which also combines motivational aspects of the human behavior and how it is to be understood and practiced.